So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we have what I believe is called the Ruins of Imladris. So, it's a kind of interesting map. It is actually one we have seen in some form before, albeit the map was slightly different then. The settlement, if you can call it that here in the middle, was, well, it was more central in the map, and also the terrain around it was very flat and open. Now, however, the terrain around it is more heavily covered by trees and also has sort of steeper gradients on all sides as well. Also, last time we saw it, the enemy attackers were approaching from all sides. This time, however, they are going to be approaching from the front pretty much exclusively in this siege battle, and it is a lore-friendly one, I believe, after a cursory glance. But yes, we have Clatati playing as Arthedain, and the player who sent me the battle replay, Farkin, is going to be playing as the realm of Imladris. But we'll go through the attacking armies first of all, as they try and wrest control of these ruins away from the good people of Middle-earth. Starting off with Tweak, who's playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. So he's probably going to be going around this large incline over here and going to try and attack the settlement from the back end, which is definitely wise. I think one thing the attackers should be looking to do here is, at the very least, if they're going to attack from the front in large numbers, only two of the armies should do that. At least one of them should be trying to look to get in through other means in order to try and stretch the defence a little bit. And the Misty Mountains definitely have the numbers with which to do that. They've got some heavy goblin infantry, which of course in terms of quality is not going to set the world on fire, but they are here in large numbers. Plenty of disposable troops that the Misty Mountains can throw at their enemies, and also can be used to absorb ammunition from those archers, of course. Something a little bit more impressive is going to be the heavy goblin spears, especially if the Misty Mountains over on this side are going to be facing off against primarily Arthedain. Even though the AP would be useful against Imladris, the extremely high melee defense of Imladris, as well as the armour, will make damage from spearmen like this be a little bit harder to come by. But even so, AP spears like this are relatively few and far between, at least the ones that are more reasonably priced, and it is a real pillar of the Misty Mountains army, the fact that even their sort of more defensive spear unit has got a little bit of bite into it against the right kind of foe. Also got the Mountaineer at Coast here, which are a much more impressive line infantry unit. As I continuously say, this, I believe, is intended to be a line infantry unit for Dol Guldur more so than the Misty Mountains. They definitely have the Dol Guldur look to them. For the time being, they're here. And that also means that the Misty Mountains have access to a line infantry unit, which for all intents and purposes is the equivalent of the Uruk-hai infantry, which is something very useful for them, to be honest with you, because for the most part, a lot of their mainline infantry is made up of just the heavy goblin units, which in terms of quality, of course, leave a lot to be desired against a lot of other factions. The fact they have this to sort of bolster them is quite nice. Cave trolls, again, in a situation like this, where you're looking at a settlement that you have to take, there's going to be defensive lines. In order to break through those lines and get at maybe some archers, or just to try and smash the line to splinters, a unit of trolls is very useful, especially cave trolls for pushing through the line very quickly because of their dense formation. Definitely a reason to bring them, even if they are weaker overall than pretty much any other troll in sustained combat that isn't the drummers or the catapult crew. Heavy goblin crossbowmen as well, obviously an extremely important unit for the Misty Mountains because the stopping power they provide is very significant. Doesn't really matter what you hit with crossbows, you're always going to do a significant amount of damage if they have an unobstructed shot. Unobstructed is the key though, because getting into a position when you're on the attack to do that is more difficult than it may first appear. Some drummers, again, very important part of the Misty Mountains because their army, generally speaking, is going to have very low morale. Overall, I would say, on average, a Misty Mountains army has probably got the lowest morale in the game. I know a lot of people rag on about Cardland for that, but they are a human faction relative to the others. It is a problem for them, but in comparison to the disorganised legions of orcs and goblins, yeah, the Misty Mountains are probably slightly worse off in that regard, I would suggest. Not the Black Uruks of the mountains, however. They've got a little bit more to them than the hordes of goblins. They're generally in front of them. Having a heavy swordsman unit like this means that not all of their army is completely without melee defense and a bit of base damage as well. They're still not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with the equivalent elven or human units, really, but they do give some much-needed stability and damage to the middle of a line. And in this sort of situation, that is going to be important because ultimately they're going to need to do some damage to the enemy to really gain some purchase. And then the Drake Broodlings, kind of the ultimate, they'll either win you the game or they won't really do much of anything. The Drake Broodlings have a huge charge bonus. There is a glitch where the charge bonus applies continuously when they're in melee, which is kind of strange to be honest with you. But if you can make sure that they don't start running roughshod over your lines, they are relatively toothless to be honest with you. So we'll have to see if that does turn out to be the case. The central army over here is going to be Mordor, played by Grizzly Fox, another very much a numbers-focused faction, albeit with slightly more higher-tier options than the Misty Mountains get. Fodder, very, very cheap trash unit, which can obviously be used for just absorbing a bit of damage. Got some Orc Maulers in there as well, which is very useful, again, just for the AP. They'll struggle against the Elves for the same reason the Heavy Goblin Spears will, but at the very least, certainly against Arthedain, they're very useful. They are, of course, very vulnerable to arrow fire, however, which Imladris actually slightly less so, maybe even than Arthedain. But both of the defensive factions do have access to some good archers at the very least. Nazgul and Temple Executioners, obviously very scary units indeed. The Uruk Captains are AP and melee as well. I'd kind of like to see them in like a future patch be given like a mace or something to really sort of showcase that, because it would sort of make that a little bit more clear. Because the Uruk Captains, if you think of them as just a regular sword and board bodyguard unit, you may not think of them all that highly. They have much less in the unit than something like, well, they have less in the unit, I should say, than something like the Goblin King's Bodyguard, Carmel's Chosen. These are the kind of units you would place it alongside when they're actually more worth your attention than those units because of that AP. And a mace might make that a little bit more apparent. Another unit of Troll Drummers to make sure the Mordor wing of the army doesn't break, because they're still definitely subject to that sort of thing as well if you're not careful. Blackguard of Barad-dûr to push through the lines, which especially against a potentially smaller army of elves, they can really cause some havoc if they're not ready for it, the defenders. And some Olag High as well. Very good in sustained melee, much better than in sustained melee than the Cave Trolls, albeit to push through enemy lines because of their slightly wider formation. They're a little bit less adept at that. Orc Javelins, a bit of a no-brainer when you're on the attack in a situation like this because of how cheap they are and the damage they can do. Moran on infantry and Minas Morgul Chosen over here on the wing, heavily armoured spears, and then some filler line infantry. And at the back, General's Bodyguard actually is going to be the Temple Guard. I actually approve of this because they're going to be staying out of combat for as long as they can with their AP arrows, whereas the really strong stuff here in the middle you're going to want to commit fairly soon, I think, because as Mordor is wont to do, they've committed quite a lot of resources to some of their elites here. And then the final attacking army, and it is indeed going to be a law-friendly battle, we have got the Witch Realm of Angmar, played by the Vengeful One. Very scary army in the right hands. Witch Realm Scourge Raiders with those projectiles that they're going to be throwing in. They've got the armour upgrade as well to make them slightly less vulnerable to arrows on the approach, albeit that will only have a relatively minor effect. Hidden unit there, which could be any variant of the Snaga, to be honest with you. Got some Angmar Marauders, some Gundabad Guard with their stolen dwarven armaments and weaponry. We have some Guardians of Khan Doom with the armour upgrade. Some Blackwatch Legion, so another mass pushing unit there. And we have some Trolls of Angmar, some Trolls of Gundabad, and over here got some Witch Realm Hammer Guard. No Witches by the looks of things, but I actually kind of approve of that. Because one errant shot from the Witches into a defence from Imladris in particular with their lower numbers can really skew things quite heavily. We have the Witch Realm Inquisitors though to sort of patrol around, make sure there's no sallying out, or if there is, they better be very careful of the Inquisitors because there is very few cavalry units that can go toe to toe with them in a straight up brawl. Now though, we shall move on to Farkin. Just a note on the settlement as well. It's one of those settlements which, yes, it's a nice defensive position. The terrain is definitely on your side. You've got choke points to take advantage of as well. But it is relatively open. You can take cover behind some buildings and some sort of more natural formations as well, these little hills within the settlement, but it doesn't offer you quite as much protection as like a genuine walled settlement will. So the defenders do need to be quite careful there. They're quite fortunate in a way that I really think, you know, the crossbows and some of Mordor's, like the Temple Guard and so on, are pretty much the only things which can really take advantage of that if they get into the right position, the attackers. Other than that, it's only going to be lower tier stuff they're going to have to worry about. Farkin's got some Norotino warriors here. They are slightly better in melee than the standard archers of Rivendell. I'm not sure whether that's enough to really justify the increased price of them, as I say, but there's still nothing wrong with them as an archer unit. If you use them correctly, they're still going to rack up a decent kill count, and they can look after themselves in melee. Speaking of which, a couple of units of Archers of Rivendell with the armour upgrade, so they're going to be a little bit more resilient, but also ability to save a little bit of money perhaps for your infantry, which I think for Imladris in this sort of situation is definitely how you want to play it. They do have some God Helene, but that's a little bit of a different matter. They've got their special projectiles, their Silver Thorns, and also they're very strong in melee. So I definitely think that going for the slightly cheaper options, maybe foregoing the Eldarenway archers, might be the way to go, just so you can get some melee Eldarenway for this particular situation. We've got 2 units of the Gwaithir Myrdain, which is an interesting thing to go into the red limit on them. Obviously they've got massive amounts of AP damage they can deal, which will be useful against all of the attackers today, especially against those mass pushing units. If they come in too early and the Gwaithir Myrdain are at full strength, they're going to get absolutely destroyed by them. We've got the Gwythi Arthedain as well. Generally speaking, like, I always see them survive a long time. They're one of the most resilient bodyguard spear units in the game. Really, really tough. A couple of units of upgraded spears of Rivendell. They are actually AP. It makes them slightly more worthwhile, but I still think that if you have the ability to, you should probably go for the Imladris sentries because of how ruthlessly good they are. The base damage more than makes up for the lack of AP on that unit, and they're just better overall. We do have some Eldarenway archers, interestingly enough, as well as the Eldarenway swordsmen in there, and some swords of Rivendell here at the back with the armour upgrades as well. Let's see what his ally has brought to the table. In Clotati, he's got 2 units of Dunedain Peacekeepers, which I like. They tend to be really good against the Orcish factions because that extra damage really does help them against especially the lower class of Orcs, which can really help equalise a numbers fight. Similar story with the dismounted Fornost Arraign Knights, albeit of course they are unshielded, albeit with better armour. It's kind of a trade-off. I think I prefer the Peacekeepers of the 2, but then I do like my shielded infantry generally speaking because it gives you that extra bit of security, I think. Although in this sort of situation it's debatable how much range strength the attackers actually have, and that they do have, when it comes to crossbows, shields won't really save you anyway. Arthedain pikemen as well. This will really help give some solidity to the front lines because, of course, even if they have brought the Imladris sentries, they're not going to be able to carpet their front lines quite so readily with pikes as Arthedain are able to. The armour upgrade on them as well, just to provide that little bit of extra rigidity. They've got the Numinous Gate Guards, which obviously they provide a nice morale bastion on the front line, as well as being slightly stronger pikes as well. Once upon a time, they were multiple HP. Those days are long since past, but they are a shadow of themselves in that regard, I suppose, but they're still very useful. Maybe not quite so central to Arthedain as the Wardens of Tir Gorthad are to Cardland, but Arthedain don't have quite the same morale issues as their brethren to the south. Arthedain Marksman with the armour upgrade again. In a skirmish fight, Arthedain should be relatively comfortable against any faction on the field today. Even if it were Imladris they were fighting off against, it's a fight that Arthedain would probably be more willing to take because of their cheaper cost and generally more efficient engagements. Fully upgraded Evendim Spearmen, again, they are a militia unit, so I think it's a little bit misleading to see them decked out in full plate. They are a militia unit, they're the cheapest unit Arthedain can bring. We have got some Wardens of the North, some Arthedain Men-at-Arms, Arthedain Marksmen, so again a lot of range power including AP arrows, and some Evendim Spearmen guarding this pathway upwards. So there's Naruto warriors, no rangers by the looks of things, interestingly enough, for the Dunedain of Arthedain. We've got the Dismounted Knights for Numinous, we've got some Arthedain Men-at-Arms back here, more spears. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any rangers unless they pop out of nowhere, but without further ado, let's begin. Didn't look like there were any Arthedain shadow bows either, but then they can hide anywhere, so they may very well reveal themselves. That is something to be concerned about. If you are the defenders here, if Mordor did indeed decide to bring their rangers, not only because they're so damaging, but also when it comes to the Arthedain shadow bows, they're probably the best ranger at dealing with ranged fire themselves because they actually have decent armour. Actually, Naruto warriors. The God Helheim have moved forward, so Imladris moving forward, so they're going to try and aggressively shoot at Mordor as they crest the hill here, which actually I quite like the idea of. The God Helheim do indeed hide. This is definitely a unit type which has become quite reminiscent of what I'm experiencing in the Divide and Conquer campaign I'm doing, because sort of a really good shielded infantry unit combined with a very strong archer is kind of what the Berio eating Goliath are, my retinue for Celeborn himself. Albeit they are a swordsman in melee, the God Helheim, so they have a little bit more utility in melee against other infantry, which will help them in this situation here, because I don't think cavalry is really going to play a huge role. The Witch Realm Inquisitors, the best I think that they can potentially hope for is to try and worm their way into the settlement and cause a bit of chaos. There is a way in through the back, which possibly is where Angmar are heading. At the very least, a detachment of their army is heading over here. No, in fact, the entirety of their army is heading over here, I think. Maybe with the exception of the Cav. Regardless, this is good for the attackers in many ways, because putting pressure on every angle of the settlement is the best way to do things. And the temptation here certainly would have been to focus all your strength from the front, but condensing the fight into a singular choke point, especially against a faction that has got as much strength in melee as Imladris, is definitely a mistake. Mordor have got some scary things, but the overall level of quality still favours Elrond's High Elves. Angmar as well have got some nasty stuff, but again, it's a different kind of quality that Mordor and Angmar are able to bring. Much more like a cudgel, more so than a fine, sleek sword, if I were to give it some sort of analogy. Slowly making their way forwards, the attackers. You can feel sort of the noose tightening, as it were, as Mordor getting into position. They're not charging just over the hill yet, not signalling the advance, because they're waiting for their allies to get into a position where they can also attack. Snow trolls have revealed themselves, obviously a troll that can hide, so they are there. The closest thing the Misty Mountains have to a troll which is good in sustained combat, albeit they still leave a little bit to be desired when you compare them to the offerings that Mordor and Angmar have brought. They're also very quick though, so they're good cavalry hunters. The Misty Mountains are definitely a faction which is remarkably awkward to use cavalry against because of all of their halberds, their armour-piercing spears, their wargs of course, which are designed to be good against cavalry, most cavalry anyway, and fast-moving trolls. So one tool you think you could have against the Misty Mountains, which is to hit them with some really high damage lances and start breaking their will to fight quickly. It's actually much more difficult to do that than it first appears. Especially with the troll drummers around, because even if you do land that successful charge, they're probably going to stick around regardless. Meanwhile, it will be interesting to see what sort of ranged pressure can be put on to the defenders here. A little bit surprising to see the Gwaith Myrdain come out in front. Having said that, the stakes are in position, so they do need to be careful, the vengeful one. He needs to walk through those stakes, which of course walking when you're in full view of the elven firing line is not really a terribly enticing prospect. I mean, when it comes to cavalry like this, if you're in command of the only cavalry unit on the field in a siege battle, whether you're on the attack or the I'd say on the attack especially, the best thing to do really is to wait until the late game to deploy them. The earlier you deploy them, the better the other team is going to be prepared to deal with them. And if you can't really stop a cavalry unit from running roughshod over your army, it can be the difference between victory and defeat. Even though they are melee cavalry, the charging they can do, the fear they can cause, could still make the Inquisitors a real kingmaker in this battle. Grizzly Fox still just waiting for his allies to get into position. The Misty Mountains are almost ready really to start moving in. Unlike the elves, who may want to be a little bit more reticent with their arrows until some of Angmar's better stuff gets forward, I'd suggest that the Arthedain marksmen will probably be a little bit more liberal with their use of ammunition. And they'll probably start shooting at the Misty Mountains as soon as they are able. This is a pretty wide area for Arthedain to actually cover. Definitely the hardest area to hold on to, I would say. There's a sort of narrower choke point here. It looks fairly wide, but this is also another one. But these two choke points are fairly close together. And so the Misty Mountains, if need be, can pivot between one or the other depending upon what level of defence is laid on for them. Whereas over here, these choke points are technically close together as well, but they sort of diverge in different directions, and very quickly you can find you've spread yourself too thin if you aren't careful. Swords of Rivendell waiting, biding their time. Archers of Rivendell. Also the calm before the storm. They're probably in range of the trolls, to be honest with you, but you really don't want to be shooting at the trolls, to be honest with you, because they're not really gonna. It's not really going to offer you much of anything. Like the God Helene, actually, Silverthorn arrows you can shoot at trolls, but that's more if you want to just sort of break up their advance and make life just a little bit more awkward for them. What are the God Helene actually firing at? Kind of hard to tell, to be honest with you. Angmar Marauders? I hope they're not firing at the Angmar Marauders. Maybe they were just stuck in fire at will. Meanwhile, what have we here? Tweak moving forwards. Just getting ready for the assault to begin. A simultaneous assault from all sides is definitely the way to go here, I would suggest. And we are going to see the opening sort of telling salvos from the High Elves here as the Norotino warriors begin to open up. What are they actually firing at? Orc fodder? Probably not the target they want to be firing at. Mordor won't mind in the slightest that the fodder is taking some hits. But perhaps the elves are a little bit restless, a little bit bloodthirsty. The unit they probably want to be saving their ammunition for is the Orc Maulers, and you can see actually some of the arrows are making their way back here. They don't have the best angle though, which is the problem. It might be the Elder Runway Archers even. And it's Morgul Chosen are a significantly more expensive unit, but they're also very nicely attributed to deal with archer fire. Very nice armour by Mordor standards, good shields. Apologies for that. Yet another phone call, which I managed to catch just in time, I think, before it interrupted my sentence, but nonetheless, we do have the Orcs of the Misty Mountains here, and again, their numbers should serve them quite well. I think they will much prefer going up against Arthedain, because I think some of their lower cost AP units will be a little bit more useful against Arthedain than they would be against the High Elves, and I do think, ultimately, the quality that Mordor can bring and the brute force that Angmar can bring makes them slightly the better candidates to try and tackle a high quality Imladris defence. It is definitely, it's sort of a baby steps from the attackers here as they sort of try to set up an attack where they can crash in all at once, which is the right way to handle things, but it's all in the execution here, because all of this sort of preamble will be for nothing if they can't make good use of this. Now Arthedain joining in the party as well, starting to fire away on the enemy as they move forward, going after the Mountain Uruk host, which, I mean, they're decently armoured, decently shielded, but they're a better target than the heavy goblin infantry, I would suggest. The Drake Broodlings are in the way. Not in the way, they're sort of getting held up by the heavy goblin infantry. This could be interesting though. The Drake Broodlings, perhaps even more so than the cave trolls, can pull through an unprepared front line very, very easily. You can see the Mountain Uruk host engaging. What do the Drake Broodlings want to do? They're crashing through their own men. Will they be able to get through here? The Evandin Spearmen do hold them in place for now. In come the pikes as well. The Drake Broodlings are kind of an enigma, to be honest with you. I don't really know if they are classified as cavalry or not. I believe they are, because they have those invisible riders, which technically means pikes. If the Drake Broodlings stay in melee against these pikes, I think it could be really, really bad for them. You can't use them in the same way as you can use trolls, because trolls classify as infantry, and they're actually really good against pikes, because the low damage of pikes is really, really poorly suited for fighting trolls, and the formation tends to get broken up when the trolls come in. But yeah, these Drake Broodlings are not making any sort of progress whatsoever, so that's going to be a lot of money down the drain, unfortunately, and Arthedain will hold them at bay. But the goblins are spilling forwards. Over here, on the other hand, Mountain Uruk host, they should gain the upper hand against the Evandim archers if there isn't any sort of support coming in from the archers, to be honest with you, especially if some heavy goblin spears move in. With the dismounted Fornost Array Knights, that fight would turn around again, of course, with cave trolls also moving in. Meanwhile, see, I think a retreat coming forward now, yes, as Mordor starts to come forward in a big way. Swords of Rivendell actually pushing forward, going to try and stave off the Orc Javelins. Obviously that is a problem. It's one of the great conundrums when you're on the defence, how best to sort of deal with these Javelins, but Grizzly Fox has allowed the Swords of Rivendell to close that gap, and they will get some good kills. Imladris should then, well, I mean, it's Orc fodder isn't going to be a concern, but Orc fodder mixed in with the more heavily armoured Minas Morgul chosen, especially when they're sort of unsupported like this, is probably going to be pretty bad for the Swords of Rivendell. Angmar lagging behind here. This is actually unfortunate from the Ventral one. His allies are moving in. He probably has the least appealing attack, considering he's got probably the best of the Elven units pointing in his direction, but he still needs to move in. The worst thing you can do in this situation as an attacker is leave your allies in the mud as you sort of leave your own army safe, because in the end it's going to bite you as much as it bites them. And that could ultimately be a real problem for them. The Drake Broodlings actually turning around and getting into these Arthedain man-at-arms and Evandim spears. You can see over here now, with some decent quality infantry, with some trolls, a nice charge from the Drake Broodlings. They actually have managed to destroy this first layer. Now the Wardens of the North are here. Drake Broodlings thought about charging in them, but they think better of it. Dismounted Fornost Array Knights falling apart as well, so it goes to show that if you try and be a little bit too meagre with your defensive line and the enemy does come forward, you need to respond quickly, and I don't think Arthedain was caught a bit flat-footed there. Initially the defence over here was going very well, and it continues to do so, but the Misty Mountains realise that. They double back with some of their stronger units, and they have managed to make a bit of a mockery of that initial defence over here, and now it's a little bit chaotic. I mean, they've managed to charge down the hill with some Arthedain man-at-arms. The Wardens of the North are still firing away, which is a concern. It means they can basically pick and choose their targets and kill what they choose. Goblin King Bodyguard and Blackbacks are down there. They should probably be saved, to be honest with you, especially the Blackbacks. Otherwise the Wardens of the North will almost certainly target them. In comes some dismounted Knights for Numenus as well, so some line infantry moving in to plug the gap, but it isn't exactly in the most cohesive manner. There are trolls, there are drakes, albeit the drakes have taken a lot of damage at this point and are falling by the wayside, but they have at least managed to smash through one layer of the Arthedain defence, which is better than it looked like they were going to manage, which is good for them. Arthedain pikemen doing a good job over here. Once again, the trolls stop dead in their tracks. I believe that's because, yeah, there are heavy swordsmen in there, so in addition to the spears and pikes, which trolls are usually quite good against, heavy swordsmen and shock infantry generally they're not. Dunedain Rangers do indeed reveal themselves as well, which is going to be a real concern for the Misty Mountains, because now they're getting shot really badly. But it's not a glamorous job, but often one of the attackers does need to be the one to sort of throw themselves under the bus so their allies can flourish, albeit that doesn't really seem to be what's happening over here for Grizzly Fox, because the Swords of Rivendell have been backed up by Spears of Rivendell. Seeing that Mordor isn't really committing fully to this choke point over here, the AP phalanx that the Spears do offer are going to be useful against those Municipal Chosen, and Imladris holding very stoutly over here. It does appear though that the attackers are trying to sort of single out Arthedain of the two, because Mordor coming over here trying to get through these Evendim Spears. And with Orc Maulers on the front line and Uruk Captains, you would say that those Evendim Spears don't stand much of a chance at all with all the AP that's being flung their way, considering that their very impressive looks for a militia unit come entirely from their armour. Bad sign that all that is being done to them. Meanwhile, Angmar are now moving forward in a massive way. They're moving forward with pretty much all they can, and in fact they've managed to get their trolls in behind enemy lines, which reflects pretty badly, honestly, on Imladris' defence. They were completely unprepared. They were probably quite comfortable sort of micromanaging individual units, and in the end they're going to pay the price here, or at least their Eldarenway archers are going to pay the price. Again, Arthedain also needs to be alert to this situation. They've got trolls right in behind them. Dunedain Peacekeepers, I mean, there are troll slayers right there as well. I mean, the clue is in the name there. Definitely in melee, the troll slayers will be a little bit more effective than the peacekeepers because of the huge damage and AP damage at that the troll slayers do. But yeah, those Eldarenway archers taking a lot of damage there, which is unfortunate. The Blackwatch Legion have also pushed through, which is bad news. Bad news bears. 2 units of Gwaith Myrdain. The time, honestly, to commit them is now, because Angmar have come forward with basically everything they have to try and smash the Elven defence in one fell swoop. And again, like, this is the sort of play that I don't like, because he's clearly he's invested a lot of his money in his Gwaith Myrdain there, his golden goose as it were, and he's scurrying them away. He wants to save them until the end, and that is certainly my pet peeve. The witches are right there. Like, the witches were out in the open there. They could have been engaged by the Gwaith Myrdain, and then that would have been really terrible for the witches. Like, there's no way they win that fight. Angmar are going to take a lot of damage by doing this, but they are ultimately going to gain entry into the settlement and start causing chaos, which could very well help out his allies. And in fact, Angmar could be the one throwing themselves under the bus. I think Angmar and the Misty Mountains are probably not going to live to see the end of this fight, if only because the Misty Mountains have taken tons of damage at the hands of Arthedain's archers. And Angmar doing what they're doing is very reckless. It could very well pay off, we shall see. Mordor, on the other hand, with a little bit slower of an approach, they have managed to barge through those spears over there with the assistance of the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, and now the Dunedain and the Arthedain men-at-arms trying to hold them back yet further, but there are still Uruk captains in there. And I have to give the attackers some credit, because they are now really pressing from all sides in what ways they can. And panic could very well set in. You really need to sort of keep your cool in this situation. Swords of Rivendell getting in here. The Witchers have been engaged in melee and defeated, however, which is a... Thought it was going to crash then. That's how this game be at this point in time, with the Witchers up close. But it's unfortunate there, because Imladris did a good job, but the Witchers managed to get a point-blank volley, breaking off the Swords of Rivendell that were nearby. They are, unfortunately for them, however, still being shot, which means they aren't going to live any longer. The Gwaith Myrdain are in here now. It's actually interesting, like, the Witchers could have shot the Gwaith Myrdain instead of the Swords of Rivendell, which is a much juicier target. And the Witchers are gone, effectively, because it's just an officer that's left. And obviously he can't shoot, so not important. Both units of Gwaith Myrdain crushing some Scourge Raiders underfoot. So I think the tide is turning. Angmar are going to win in the choke point, but ultimately they're not going to have enough left in the tank, I don't think, unless, well, I mean, the Hammer Guard are in here, the Inquisitors could get in here. It's not the most... Again, these arrows are going up in the air, which is never a good sign. Some of them are firing in a more linear way. So they're going to do some damage. I mean, you're not going to do much damage with archers to Blackwatch Legion anyway. Troll Slayers moving in, victorious against the Trolls of Angmar. Going to turn their attention back to Mordor, as well as another unit of pikes. So they've managed to sort of survive the Mordor onslaught. There are some Orc Javelins over here, very depleted unit of them at that, but they're still going to get some damage done. There's still fighting going on over here, so Mordor definitely prioritising the other way through the settlement. With the Gwaith Arthedain, well, I say that, like the Olag High were committed. The Gwaith Arthedain proving to be just a real wall once again. Definitely a unit which has got a ton of holding power. They're getting shot from the side. What by? Temple Guard? Definitely the right sort of unit to deal with the Gwaith Arthedain. But Orc Javelins and fodder in melee is most certainly not. This is a concern for the defenders, however. With the Witch Realm Inquisitors in here, and they're going to try and cause some havoc now. They've definitely got some good targets they can charge down. Maybe not the Gwaith Arthedain. I mean, even a rear charge on them, to be honest with you, is not great because they're so resilient. The damage they can do. What's going on over here? They're going to try and charge into the rear of the Noratino warriors. That should be enough to break them, to be honest with you. Wasn't the best of charges in the end, and they could find themselves getting caught actually here as the Gwaith Arthedain scurry back to try and deal with this Angmar problem. As you can see how strong Angmar are, even as much damage as they took pulling through that defence, they're still standing, still pushing towards the middle of the town. The God Halim are still here, however, as well as some peacekeepers, so it may not ultimately be enough, but I do think the Misty Mountains have fallen prey to the full fury of Arthedain's firing squads. The Dunedain Rangers and Wardens of the North in particular, but Blackbacks are on the front line. They should be victorious on the front line, to be honest with you, as well. I mean, there's some Goblin King's bodyguard which got in behind the lines, dealing with the marksman. So, I mean, the Misty Mountains could well pull through as well. Again, damaged. I think it's time for the defenders to consolidate in the middle at this point, to be honest with you, because if it stays as it is, they're just going to slowly lose on all fronts rather than win on all fronts. Both their units of Dunedain Troll Slayers are over here, as well as Rangers. Blackguard of Barad-dûr will not enjoy being in melee against the Troll Slayers, but there's another fairly numerous unit of Maulers coming forward, as well as another much more depleted one. Those Javelins have been up there firing unimpeded for a little while at this stage. What have we got going on back here? Some pikes heading across. Still, the Eldawen Way archers supporting the swords of Rivendell, that are still fighting on the front line with the Noratino warriors. They've done a really good job over here with limited resources in Imladris. So that is one choke point in which they have been successful. Gwaith Arthedain pushing in here alongside the Wardens of the North. The issue they're going to have here, though, is against the Witch Realm Hammer Guard, whose AP, probably one of the few units on the field that the Gwaith Arthedain probably should have been a little bit more concerned about. And they also have the cover of the Witch Realm Inquisitors, which is definitely not something that is ideal for the defenders, but a unit of Arthedain pikemen to sort of prevent any sort of rear charging from the Witch Realm Inquisitors as they move over here to try and mop up the Eldawen Way archers, who have had a really tough time of it. They've been pursued by entire sections of an army, and now by cavalry. Still some elven archers here in the middle of the ruins, firing into the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. The Troll Slayers standing almost alone at this point, but most of the units on the front line are actually relatively low quality. It's only really the Nazgul they need to be concerned about. The Nazgul is definitely a problem. Forward come the heavy goblin spears. And I think this may very well turn out to be the merits of attacking from all sides of a settlement all at once. Because I think the attackers have got the defenders where they want them at this stage. There's still a few things to be concerned about. There's still a few units to be worried about for the attackers, but I think they have. I think they were able to avoid taking the damage that would have made this put it beyond them, essentially. There goes Elrond. Chest caved in by a rusted Orc Warhammer. I mean, there's still Gwaith Miridain. This is the main thing to be concerned about, I think, for the attackers. The fact that there's still a huge cluster of elite units for the defenders over here, which they still need to deal with. 2 Gwaith Miridains, a Gwaith Arthedain, the Wardens of the North. None of these units are something that you can take lightly, otherwise they will punish you greatly. There's some Arthedain pikemen guarding this choke point over here, but the clock is ticking because, I mean, there's no town centre on this map, but the settlement is under threat. The Misty Mountains may be getting a little bit too greedy there as they charge forward. The drummers not enough to keep those 30 heavy goblin spears from fighting against the elites, and maybe the defenders are alright here. I think this is the issue. Like, the attackers, the Inquisitors, they've managed to get into the settlement, but they haven't really done anything with the advantage they've given themselves. And now questionable decisions are also creeping in, where like now that you have the momentum, you should really be trying to carry that through into the rest of the settlement, not dawdling on the periphery, allowing the elven archers to do their thing. 132 orc javelins, orc fodder. We're fighting off against the remnants of that defence over there. The Blackguard, their work is done. There are still 9 Nazgul to be worried about. And the Gwaith-i-Mhirdain moving across to the middle of the settlement once more. So yeah, Angmar have been thwarted at this stage, but I would say Angmar did their job. I think they were lagging behind their 2 allies a little bit, but ultimately it didn't really matter, because when they came forward with everything they had, and they managed to find gaps, which is all you can really ask of an attacker if he's going to do that. The Blackbacks are over here still doing their thing. There are some Dunedain peacekeepers in there as well, but they will fare fairly poorly against Blackback berserkers, to be honest, especially supported as they are with some heavy goblin meat shields. I think the defenders, they have managed to sort of reposition themselves quite nicely. There are Temple Executioners on the front line. They're sans the armour upgrade, but in come the Mhirdain, in come the God Hellim. So yeah, a lot of the Elven units that are remaining are scary stuff. Arthedain are a little bit more depleted, but then that's to be expected. Mordor and the Misty Mountains certainly prioritised going after Arthedain, more so than Imladris. Perhaps if you were to give someone the choice, that would be the way to do things, but that did leave Angmar largely alone against Imladris, and considering that, they did quite well to do what they did, but we'll see. I mean, depending on the results here will depend on whether each team's ideas and plans were good ideas after all, or whether they were folly. Those God Hellim, actually no, that's Arthedain marksmen. The God Hellim committed themselves to melee, didn't they? I was wondering, like I was going to say, they've been firing for a long time. I'd be really surprised if they still had ammunition. The Silver Thorns have been expended. No need to be concerned really though, because 37 God Hellim in melee is still something to really be concerned about. You can always tell when a situation is desperate as well, when an orc faction is throwing their troll drummers into melee to try and give a little bit of oomph to their assault, because they really don't offer the same sort of punch as even the lowliest mountain trolls will. And especially against something like Gwaith-i-Mhirdain, they're going to find themselves getting killed off very quickly. Again, that's surprising, those Witchram Inquisitors continue to sort of go. That's like the one thing Angmar can do at this point, so they do have the abilities at this point to sort of completely focus on one thing. The Wardens of the North actually came over here to stop the Blackback Berserkers' advance, and they succeeded. And now the Misty Mountains are actually going to be thwarted over here. But yeah, I think the problem the Vengeful Ones had with his cavalry, ironically enough, considering how aggressive he was with his infantry, he hasn't really committed his cavalry enough here. Like, he's managed to get them into the settlement, but he hasn't really done anything with them. And sometimes you have to risk getting caught and ultimately losing your cavalry in order to get any of the benefits here. And again, I think that chance has, to be honest with you, passed him by in this battle. Because at this point there's a whole unit of pikemen that they can use over here, which effectively can block the way to get at the really juicy targets. And at this point Mordor is also down to the likes of Orc Maulers trying to hold the line against a rallying elven force. Still javelins coming in here, which are doing a good job actually. Like, again, cheap javelins like that can be such a boon for the orcs to have. There goes Azog, the Dunedain dealing with him. Other runaway archers depleted, but that does mean that their ammunition supply has gone that little bit further. Arthedain warriors, were they actually victorious over there? That'd be remarkable. I mean, it was only fodder that was over there, to be fair, so the Arthedain general ripped open by one of those nasty looking barbed swords that the berserkers wield. Temple Guard firing away, going after the archers in behind. It's not really the best target, if I'm being honest, so like the cavalry can deal with them. The Temple Guard need to be dealing with the elven elites, because if you don't, then you're going to subject yourself to a war of quality against Imladris, which it's hard to see how Mordor are going to win that at this stage. It's an interesting battle to behold, I suppose, if both sides had all their quality units still alive, but Mordor have lost some of theirs. Temple Executioners are probably gone at this point. The Uruk Captains were committed early, so they're gone. The Nazgul are probably still on the front line, but they've probably taken losses. Yeah, they're in and amongst things over here, right in and amongst the Warhammers of the Gwaith-i-Mhirdain. Only 4 of them remain. It's a problem. Again, Orc Javelins being committed to melee to try and keep some semblance of a line going, some semblance of an assault, but I think the quality of the Elves is what's going to be enough to see them over the line here. Arthedain also with their pikes. Their pikes have actually abandoned the front line, which is a bit of a mistake from Arthedain here, because they're leaving the Elves wide open for a rear charge. And that could be a pretty key error from Arthedain there. I think it's probably already too late, to be honest with you. In fact, there are Gwaith the Arthand over here that can turn around and do the business with their spears. And the fact there isn't really... Well, I mean, there's Temple Guard moving to the front line. Maybe if turning their backs on the Temple Guard would be something to be concerned about. If they still have ammo, though, they really should be shooting at the Gwaith the Arthand. Give that cavalry its best chance. I mean, I think it's too late at this stage. Those pikes need to get back over there, though there's really no reason for them to still be over here. The last of the Blackbacks are just being passed around by the Warns of the North, proving their worth in melee once again. Very expensive unit, the Warns of the North, but worth every penny in most situations, especially on the defence like this for Arthedain. Bit of a jack of all trades are the northern Arnorian Kingdom. But definitely archers is one area where they can count themselves as having a big amount of expertise, as well as cavalry. Like, infantry is probably the area where they slightly fall down, especially in comparison to their sister kingdom Gondor. But it's still passable at the very least, and I think this battle does showcase that. As much as their infantry is on its knees at this point, they were able to withstand a two-pronged assault from the Misty Mountains and Mordor to a reasonable extent. Some factions, I think, would have withered in that in the face of that assault. But at this stage, what do they actually have left? I think it might come down to the Inquisitors, you know. The Javelins. Victory seems certain. Madness. There's still 12 Gwaith Imladris over here. I can already tell what someone's going to say in the comments. The Zebras have returned. Honestly, I think maybe the colour scheme is a little bit strange, but like I think the overall look of the armour is fine. I think if you were to just make it silver, I think it would fit really nicely. Effectively, that would make them a dismounted version of the Gwaith'i Rockdor with those sort of flared Imladris helms. Sort of a dismounted Gwaith'i Rockdor with those hammers. Which is cool. Temple Guard, fighting hard on the front line. I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion, this. The Elves do need to mob that unit of Temple Guard. It's not completely beyond the realms of possibility the Orcs win this with some well-placed charges, although that... I'm not sure if I'd call that a well-placed charge. That was more of a kamikaze. They did do some decent damage, actually, to the Arthedain pikemen there, but every time they do that, they're going to take some nasty losses to their... I'll say that, only one? They have their backs turned, I suppose, but need to be real careful. Here comes some heavy goblin spears, though. 55 of them. They must have been a unit that routed once and have returned. You can tell they're already wavering. The amount of support they actually give the Temple Guard here... Yeah, they never made it to melee. Nothing if not predictable, the goblins, when their leadership has abandoned them. Victory seems certain for the Temple Guard. I somehow doubt that. Victory seems certain for the cavalry. What are they doing here? The Witch King himself. Will he be defeated by simple rank and file soldiers? Possibly, because that cavalry is just remaining in there at this stage. The Temple Guard ultimately end up routing. It's an interesting one, but like their general had died. Mordor's leadership does abandon them. And now, the Drum Inquisitors are, I believe, the only ones left on the field. So Angmar, in spite of their main army being defeated, fastest, I think that was the Witch King, wasn't it? Yeah, there's his body. His subordinate, who is the actual general for all intents and purposes, remains with that ludicrously sized mace, surrounded by pikemen and elven spearmen. So this is going to be the end of him. There go the Temple Guard. Only 3 of them remained after they turned their back on the fight. We have a decent fight here, considering all this anti-cavalry and AP that's all around him. The perks of being a general, I suppose, in a high-quality unit. But there we go, victory, and a closely fought one at that. Within 1% technically. It doesn't take into account the routing units though, so technically speaking I would say that is a 4% differential. But that's still impressive. A good fight indeed. And the Elven ruins here remain in the hands of the Free Peoples, but specifically, of course, the Elves. And Arthedain getting more kills, not too surprising because they were facing off against the initial assaults from Mordor and the Misty Mountains, and their archers will have done quite a lot of the heavy lifting. But in the late game, after that damage had been done, it was the quality of Imladris which helped see the defenders over the line. As for the attackers, they did the right thing by attacking all at once from all sides, but ultimately they weren't really able to. Once they got into the settlement, I would say their decision making wasn't quite on point enough to take advantage of some of the opportunities. Like the cavalry eventually started really racking up some decent kills for itself, but it took too long doing that really. Mordor as well, the Misty Mountains, like they did manage to push through and do some damage in certain cases, more so Mordor I'd say. The Misty Mountains I think were a little bit more bottled up and well managed by Arthedain, more so than anything else. But yeah, overall a very nice quality battle. That's a big thank you to Farkin for sending it in, and a big thank you to all the players for being a part of it. I'm always on the lookout for, like even though obviously Reforged I'm going to be intermingling it with a bit more Divide and Conquer, at least for the next little while, depending upon how it's received. I'm always going to have a place for more Reforged battle replays. Decent ones especially, obviously, because part of the problem was the declining quality was really starting to get to me, but battles like this are why I continue to do things. So yeah, if people were wondering, I am still, of course, accepting replays. Like, it would be mad for me not to. So if you do have Reforged, or indeed some Aurelian stuff, then do not hesitate to send them in, because they will be shown more likely than not, especially if they're a sort of a siege like this. Like this battle as well is fairly ideal because it's not too long, so my will doesn't sap away from me as we enter the 50,000th frame. But it's also competitive, it's lore friendly, it's thematic in the Elven ruins, exactly the sort of thing I like to see. But let's see what did the damage for Imladris, and we can see the Gwathi Arthedain really did a good job at holding down the front line. The Gwathi Myrdain doing a good job in the late game as well, that quality, the AP, really doing the business as well. But it was, unsurprisingly perhaps, in a siege like this, the archers where a lot of the damage was done. Noratuno warriors getting nearly 350 kills. I'm not sure how much of that was at range and how much of that was in melee, because they were facing off against stuff like Orc Fodder in melee as well, which Noratuno warriors do have those heightened abilities up close and personal in comparison to the archers of Rivendell. A lot of the more basic units for Imladris actually were subject to the rough treatment at the hands of Angmar when the Vengeful One really started to move forward and do some heavy damage. But still, a good performance, and you certainly can't complain here if you're the Imladris player, or indeed the Arthedain player. Their archers did quite a lot of the work, I would suggest. I think a lot more of their melee probably had a harder time with Imladris, but I'd say their archer line also did significantly better. Stuff like Dunedain Rangers and Wardens of the North is always going to give them a bit of a leg up in that regard. But yes, big thank you to Farkin once again for sending this one in. I'm always on the lookout for more. Like Reforged, effectively what I'm going to try and do is there's another one that I want to do, another two actually I think that I want to do from the old bunch, and then it's almost like I'm starting from a clean slate. So I've got two more on the backlog at this point. Everything else, if I missed something decent that you sent me, then I do apologise, but at this point I think for my own sanity and sort of keeping track of everything in my head, what I'm going to do is sort of wipe the slate clean after those two and sort of start from square one with Reforged replays. So with that in mind, if there is good Reforged stuff that you want to send me, do not hesitate to do so, and hopefully we can sort of start August on the right foot with regards to Reforged, alongside Divide and Conquer, which I'm hoping will be more in stream form from here on out. I think after part 3, which at the time of recording is yet to release, but before you see this it should be out, to be honest with you. Following on from that, we're probably going to be doing a weekly stream of Divide and Conquer instead of parts, because I do know that ultimately if I'm to continue doing Divide and Conquer in the way that I am, it will see drastically diminishing returns, because that's how campaigns in Total War on YouTube work. Long form content like that is hard to pull off, but streams are a little bit different and it works much better there. So I do want to do that. My internet situation's a little bit spotty at the moment because of local conditions, but we'll see. We'll see. It's all about finding the right time where the bandwidth is not being hogged and the roadworks are not causing havoc. But we shall see. Regardless, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.